I think if you look at Cyberpunk, I can't remember the exact budget, but it was in that neighborhood. It was like $500 million or so just to get through 7 years of, if not more, years of development to get a flawed product at the end, to be honest. And only now is Project Red, CD Red, able to recoup some of those projected losses.
Building a AAA game is very difficult. It's like combining movies and software development into a single product. It needs to be immersive. It needs to be captivating. It needs to be entertaining. And so where our model is different from the traditional studio model, you mentioned CD Projekt Red, and Bethesda is another great example, by the way. They just launched Starfield a few months back, maybe 6 months ago now. And their CEO talks about Starfield's a game that was 25 years in the making. Now, they were building it for 10 years, but they conceptualized, hey, can we do this open space, open world concept? And the technology wasn't really there 25 years ago. Now it is, but 10 years of development and releasing a product, that's to me is a bigger risk because you're just hoping that when it comes out, people are actually going to like it. I think we're in an advantageous position because although it's still going to take us a long time to complete the product, we're getting things out today and delivering something in the hands of the consumer, and then they can actually provide feedback to us on their interaction with that product. And we take that very seriously. We listen to the feedback and we evolve our product. Of course, the end goal is still the same, but the way we get there can change dynamically, and we produce revenue off of that. We deliver a good feature. Here's people buying more assets from us, right? So I think it's kind of an interesting new paradigm.
So it's funny that you say it's hard to develop a AAA game, one of which that you mentioned, Starfield, is open world. Star Atlas is more than just one AAA game, though, is what I'm seeing. Your team is trying to release a racer, a racing game, a first-person shooter, a tabletop economy strategic resources game, and you're dabbling into VR. I think there's a few more that I'm missing here. But you're trying to tackle several of the major genres in which the examples that we gave earlier were attacking only one of them individually. So this raises a comment that I've heard about Star Atlas from investors is it too ambitious? I mean, $350 million to get this to fruition is about the right budget for one of these genres. How are you going to hit all 4 or 5 of them at the same time?
Well, I'm glad you have identified the different, I can call them verticals, but really gameplay loops that are going to be included. And before I get into Star Atlas, the MMO, our flagship product line in Unreal Engine, I did want to touch on Sage. So that's the browser-based RTS. And this is a new entry point, lower entry point for players that don't have the high-end gaming PCs. So they can come in and start playing. We can develop that on a faster timeline because it's JavaScript, TypeScript, or some of the other web-based engines that we use. Like we've been building in Play Canvas for a 3D version of that. We actually have some big plans for Sage, though, and I won't completely tease it out here, but I will say I'm extremely excited about the position and transition that we're taking with that Sage product line. But it is an RTS MMO. It's a persistent world territory control game. This is where we have the active economy today, and it is arguably, if not undeniably, our most popular product to date because a lot of our consumers, our users, are people that are interested in the economic incentives of the game and being able to generate and earn Atlas as they play. And we've activated that fully in Sage already. And so we already have a great user base there. I would also note, as if it wasn't complex enough, and maybe digging myself in a hole, we're building as much of the product fully on chain on Solana as possible. That Sage product.
So I'm going to stop you there. So Sage, which I did have the pleasure of joining on day one when you released it, this was, and just for our viewers and our audience, just to understand, this is an economic game. If anyone here in the audience has ever played Civ 4 in combination of StarCraft 2 and onwards, this is a combination of all of those, plus a homegrown or internal marketplace, almost like a commodities market. So think of a combination of CME, am I right? Combination of like CME, Civ 4, StarCraft 2. It really is an economy that you've built, or at least an economic model that you've built. And I feel like it's a test bed for your economists in the background to see if we were the Fed, how would we run an economy? And it seems to work that way. Then the fact that the tokens are paired and can be monetized into stablecoin at some point is remarkable. And I do see players who are generating income. I don't like to call it yield because it requires gameplay, requires interaction in the environment. And so they're actually generating income in this model. And what I find remarkable is that it's applicable to all of your verticals. Theoretically, it's applicable to all your verticals. It's not just stuck in Sage. And I think this is what a lot of investors kind of miss out, is that this model is a system. It's not just a point system, but it's an economic model that can be applied to the shooter, that can be applied to the racer. And what I find even more interesting is that if you extend the imagination a bit more, to your point earlier that this is an expansive IP, meaning that you're opening the IP to third parties and to partners, other partners and other commercial products and games can piggyback on this model in order to drive network adoption and virility in their own IP. So when I look at it, that's kind of the message I'm seeing. And so when you look at Sage now and stepping back, what's the next step for where you want to take this? And how are investors getting it? And is it something that they're able to comprehend when you show it to them?
Well, first of all, it was a very eloquent description of Sage. I think you've captured a lot of key points there. And I think you might have you said you really enjoyed the launch. Look, Sage, for anybody that sees it, they look at it and they say, this doesn't look like anything a professional studio would build. It's very basic 2D environment, a lot of text space, a lot of fields, but that wasn't the ambition of that particular product. The ambition was, can we activate a fully on-chain economy and stabilize that and allow players to produce revenue? And that we've done extremely well. In fact, we're making up 10 to 15% of the total Solana network transaction volume on any given day using this product, right? And what is even more powerful is the fact the economy itself did not immediately collapse. Now, I would point out that the way that earnings are generated, income is generated, is not exclusively through some inflation curve. And that's what has been commonplace and has been a major pitfall in Web3 games historically, is you present the user with high yield by a hyperinflationary token emission schedule, and there's no back-end utility for that token. So the only avenue is to liquidate that into something else. The token collapses, the game becomes unenjoyable because that was the core tenet. In our case, one other point that you mentioned was that all of the assets are interoperable with the other and kind of interwoven with the other product verticals, if you will. Just one example is fuel. So fuel needs to be crafted. You have to go mine hydrogen and then you craft that into fuel. And there's a whole lot of complexity in not necessarily that one formula, but Sage itself. We don't sell fuel. We don't sell fuel to players. You can't come to us and say, I want to buy fuel for my ship. The only way to buy that is to buy it from another player who's crafted it. And that's true of all of the core resources that are consumed in the game, food and ammunition, toolkits, things like this. And so that is the avenue for players to generate revenue, is to actually determine that they want to specialize or at least put time into producing fuel and selling that to other players. Oh, and by the way, they're consuming fuel all along too, so they need to support their operation. But the majority of the income generated in Sage is through players crafting items and selling it to other players on our marketplace, which I think is extremely powerful. And we do put a lot of emphasis on economic design. I have a great head of game economy. He's a PhD economist from Purdue. And yeah, the amount of dashboards that we look at on a daily or weekly basis is just incredible.
You can possibly imagine, you must have your own version of Glassnode inside the team looking at the data flow, because that week I remember I was watching other influencers on YouTube talk about how the sudden spike in transactions on Solana was indicative of increased activity. And I don't think too many of them realized, as you mentioned, a quarter of that was from Star Atlas launching Sage, because every transaction was being noted onto the blockchain. And this is not just settlements of payments, like transferring tokens from one person to the other. It was every ship upgrade, every transfer of individual fuel items, a movement from one part of the map to the other was an on-chain transaction. And I think for me, the realization at that point was, wow, you know what? With Solana's, I guess it's their plan to launch Fire Dancer next year. I think it's going to be 1 million TPS is what they're targeting. In a way, I almost think that might not be enough, because right now when we think of TPS and transactions per second, we're thinking of cash or booking transactions in a financial ledger. But what you've shown is that the ledger is booking more than just cash or monetary transactions. It's booking everything, every movement, every material decision that's being made that can be audited. And so I wouldn't say, some are arguing that might be overfitting it, and that's a philosophical debate, but it implies what's number one, potentially capable, what potentially the blockchain could be used for. And number two is we actually need more than 1 million TPS, because if people start to book everything, we could hit capacity a lot faster than we think. What are your thoughts from that in terms of your observations of what came out of that experiment?
I think in a way it is a race against time, and really it's Solana's race to continuously improve the network efficiency, as well as the scalability. And fortunately, so FireDancer is a validator implementation. This is a second implementation that's outside of Solana's core validator. These are the people or groups that are effectively verifying transactions and then relaying that state of the network to all of the other validators across the network. And that's how we have this decentralized shared state. There are things that we can do as well, by the way, things like batching transactions to the extent possible. We've added some of those efficiencies. So you can actually squeeze a lot of instructions into a single transaction. And our engineering team is constantly looking at how do we maximize if you think of it as a box and you can put these instructions into a box, well, the box is always a certain size. And what you want to do is fill that box up and then send it off, right? And so we're looking to optimize what users are doing so that we can fill that box before we transmit that transaction. And there's still room for improvement on our side, as well as thinking about various gameplay mechanics and which actions require on-chain transactions. But
wow, that's an innovation, actually. That's an innovation. It's almost like logistics. If you can solve for the problem of efficient transfer and packaging of information just for the game, wow, that can actually potentially be outsourced to other protocols and projects as well.
It could be. And a lot of the infrastructure that we're building today, we see an avenue in the future for, our own software as a service platform where we've built primitives and tools and gaming infrastructure that we needed. And these are things that other teams will want, especially if they're following our path, which is fully on-chain gaming logic. But we do take responsibility ourselves as well, not to overload the network and develop irresponsibly in the way that we transmit transactions. But yeah, movement, coordinates, fleet construction, fleet management, extraction, mining, crafting systems, combat systems, these are all being executed and recorded directly on Solana.
Yeah, I can imagine someone like Amazon or even an actual real-world logistics company who wants to start developing on-chain analytics. This would work very well in helping them track. I want to talk about competition a little bit, Michael. In our last conversation, we could see and we knew that larger players were coming into this space. And so right now, we haven't seen the major AAAs come in just yet. They're dipping their toes in. But we're seeing a lot of the teams spin out and building their own game networks and using their pedigree to raise capital into the space. I'm seeing deals come through like Revolving Games, Gunzilla, Treeverse, etc. All of them show great promise, and a lot of them might have been taking a page out of your book and building early stage trailers and development before they start raising serious VC capital. A lot of us who are in the allocator space noting that, hey, you know what? It's getting crowded. It feels like it's getting crowded in the game space. What goes through your mind when you see these projects come through? A lot of them are reliant on VC capital. Do you feel comfortable in the position that you're in? Obviously, you would, but walk me through how and why.
Again, I don't want to come across as arrogant here, but we do have a pretty significant head start. I've also been building companies in the crypto space, the Web3 space now for going on 8 years. We are experts in this technology, and not everyone is going to follow our same philosophy of how to build a game, what items or assets need to be on chain, or what is the utility or use of the technology itself. But I do feel that we have a significant competitive advantage in terms of expertise, understanding, and capability of building on-chain game logic. We're building a lot of stuff from scratch where we have to, but we're also very capable of pulling tooling when it is available to us into our game and leveraging that to build quickly. The game development industry itself, it's constantly evolving, but a lot of it is fairly standardized. What it takes to get from inception to completion of a game, a mainstream studio knows how to do that. And fortunately, we also have hired best in field game developers and artists and producers and people necessary to build the game. We've recruited them from all of these legacy studios as well, and they're a part of our team. So I don't want to make it sound like it's easy, because I did say it takes a long time. So it's not easy necessarily to build a high quality game or just a game in general, but it is arguably the easier component of our vision. When you consider the challenges of understanding learning crypto and learning its utility and where it can be utilized throughout your game. And so, again, I think we have a strong advantage in the latter category, which is arguably the harder component of building one of these new games. And I'll also note that just coming out when we did, we've created and cultivated what is effectively a cult-like following of players, our community. They are so passionate about what we're doing, and we still need to grow. But what I think is really interesting is following Breakpoint, I made this statement publicly, but I think it was November was the first time we had a profitable month since February of 2022. And a lot of that is on the tail end of the success of Sage, which stands for Star Atlas Golden Era, by the way. I don't know if I've clarified that, but Sage is Star Atlas Golden Era. But given our existing user base, we're effectively in a position where we're generating enough money and revenue on a monthly basis that we can sustain our development through completion, which is extremely encouraging because it is still a pretty small user base. But if that's enough to get us by, then as we get the more robust and more complete product out there, I see only upside in that revenue potential. Furthermore, just one final point on the mainstream studios coming in, I think it's great. I think it adds legitimacy to the industry as a whole. I think it's probably not a secret that there is a negative stigma towards NFTs and crypto from the traditional gaming audience. And I think there's a reason for that. A lot of people point to scams, but I don't really think most of these traditional gamers have been impacted by scams. I think it's because of the evolution of monetization policies from studios over time. And the gamers are looking at this skeptical because they're saying, wait, this new thing is just a way to get more money from me, which couldn't be further from the truth. But they need time to understand that this is a new value exchange paradigm where they can actually benefit a lot more by participating in a Web3 game than just by buying and consuming entertainment. So I think it's good. I think this will lead to more people ultimately adopting and getting into Web3 games. And I actually think we'll be a beneficiary of that.
I was talking to the Animoca team, and we were talking about one of the side effects of what happened out of Axie, and to some extent a couple of other games, is financialization of games, or the adding the speculative component has created, in some cases, an unhealthy deviation from what the game was built for in the first place, which is to have fun. And so it's very, very hard to separate that, especially if we're looking at building an economic model that feasibly, if done right, should be a healthy form, but not necessarily an unhealthy form where you have the speculative dynamic of, say, stock market, et cetera, where a lot of people can lose a lot of money as a result. And I think this is, to your point, this is where a lot of the stigma comes from, buying these NFTs in for the pump, and then a lot of people get hurt by it as price discovery moves in the opposite direction.